welcome back to Between Two Wings. I'm your host, Emily Norman, and today we have Gabriel Wertman with us. He is a general aviation pilot in Mexico and also runs the YouTube series El Avionazzo. Gabriel, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Well, thanks, Emily, for the time and for having a little chat with you guys today.
Of course. So we like to start off by just explaining what our backgrounds are. I've actually got a wing view through the Houston corridor, one of my favorite things to do. It's kind of the perfect medium of challenging yourself through complex airspace and then also giving you great views. But tell us a little bit about your background.
Well, that's a spectacular view, by the way. So let me start here. This is little Gabriel. The photograph is from 2000-ish. I'm not sure exactly the year, but it's around 2000. I was born in 96, so I was around 4 or 5 years old here. And you can see I'm in Mexico because you can see the flag right here up the window. Yeah. I'm not sure what airport we're in, but it's an interesting story because we have a twin here. It's a Cessna 310, which is my personal GA airplane. I really love the look of the airplane. It looks, as they say, it looks fast even on the ramp standing still. But it's interesting because 19 years later, in 2019, I got my multi-rating in the US and in Mexico, and I was able to fly this exact same airplane. So it was cool for me because, you know, it was a very motivational story for me. And, you know, I ended up closing the cycle 19 years later in what I thought was a huge airplane at the time. I can barely, you know, touch the nose of the airplane here. But 19 years later, I was able to fly it. And it was quite an achievement for me. I know it's not an incredibly complicated airplane to fly or anything like that, but it was a cool story, a cool personal story for me.
Yeah. And I think honestly in aviation, we have to celebrate all the small milestones, and that is a huge achievement, especially to fly the exact same airplane. So good on you for that. So I know your interest in aviation obviously started in Mexico, but then you decide to come to the US to do your private, your insurance, and also your multi. What were some of the reasons behind that, or how did you come to that decision?
You know, I initially thought it would be much faster to get my certificate in the US than in Mexico, just because there's a lot less bureaucracy, there's a lot less paperwork. You can actually start your ground school and start flying at the same time. And in Mexico, you have to do ground school first, and then you can start taking your flight lessons. So it takes, I don't know, maybe around 8 or 9 months to get your private certificate here in Mexico. It's actually a license here because it does have an expiration date. But in the US, I was able to get my private pilot certificate and my instrument rating in around 3.5 months, because I was flying a lot. So that was really my thinking was I'm going to be able to get my license a lot faster and start flying a lot sooner. But then I came back to Mexico, and when I wanted to convert my US license into my Mexican license, it took me almost a year. So I did not factor that in. They really want you to study here and, you know, use the infrastructure that they have with regards to flight schools here. So the process is a little bit complicated. You don't have to fly a lot of hours, but it's a lot of paperwork. So I ended up getting my license with my instrument rating in late December of 2016. And I started flying in Mexico around August or September of 2017. So there was a bit of a lag there because of that. I personally wouldn't recommend people that want to work in Mexico, that want to get their commercial license and, you know, work for a Mexican airline, to get their certificate in the US, just because they're going to waste over a year just in paperwork. It's going to be more expensive. Now, if you want to be an international airline pilot and you want to go live somewhere else, I would definitely recommend it. It obviously, you know, your FAA license or certificate, has a lot more status
Yeah.
around the world than the Mexican license, even though we're also part of ICAO. But it always helps to have your FAA license. And if you can, and you have the time, you have the resources to do it, it's always convenient to have, two certificates, in case you lose one for some reason, you don't pass a medical in one country or the other, you can still fly.
Yeah. And so it seems like, regardless of the long paperwork you had to do when you got back to Mexico, the speed of the process of getting your license and your ratings was kind of what drew you to the US. If you would have stayed in Mexico, though, what are, some of the things that might be lacking or may actually hold you back that you, may have been offered in the US, but not in Mexico?
Well, I would definitely say that comms would have been something I would have lacked. So my native language, as you can see, is not English, it's Spanish, but my aviation native language was English. So that really helped a lot because, I know English as my aeronautical language, and I am very comfortable using it. I have no problem flying in the US or anywhere else, and that's something that is not very. It's not at a great level here in Mexico. Actually, my hardest thing to overcome once I came back to Mexico was learning comms in Spanish. I couldn't understand a single thing they would say. I couldn't reply to any of the instructions that ATC gave me in Mexico just because I had no idea what they were talking about. And every airport here they manage, comms and instructions and VFR flights a little bit different. So you really have to get to know every airport that you're flying out of here in Mexico, at least the large international airports, because they have different procedures for VFR pilots.
Yeah. And so is that something you noticed when you went from the US to Mexico, that just the airspaces and procedures and how things were done, were there a lot of differences in there?
Well, basically everything in Mexico is uncontrolled until you're close to any airport. And then it converts into something of a class Delta, I guess. And for the larger airports, I don't know, Mexico City, Guadalajara, Monterrey, they become like a class Bravo. And basically the rule of thumb here is if you're 45 nautical miles away and you're in range with radios, you should be talking to ATC. It's sometimes really hard because it's a very mountainous terrain. We do a lot of mountain flying here. The airport I fly out of is at 8,400 feet above sea level. Yeah, so
I'm at sea level at my airport, so that's so different.
Well, I'll tell you something. It really helps if you're flying at 10,000 feet. I use a lot less fuel to get to that altitude in time. But yeah, so sometimes, comms, VOR frequencies, it's very hard to reach even, 20 miles away because of the terrain. It's an interesting, unique challenge that we have here in Mexico. But yeah, I mean, it's not uniform across the country, but you start learning, what ATC, because they're all trained at the same place, like the FAA trains their own ATC. We have the same thing in Mexico, and you start to understand like what they're looking for, when they want you to report and things like that. So it gets easier with time.
That makes sense. I feel like everything with aviation is just easier with time. You have to practice. You have to actually go out, fly, and do it. So I know totally. You are trying to do a cross-border flight eventually. A few things are getting in the way. What are some of the resources or insights you can give to other pilots who are hoping to make a trip like this? I know it's a bucket list for most, but it can be intimidating.
Yeah, I would actually say it's a lot easier if you're coming from the US to fly into Mexico, because AOPA has a whole page with regards to international flights into Canada, into Mexico, and into the Caribbean. And the resources are pretty good. Leaving the US, you basically just have to file your EAPIS. and you have to notify customs here in Mexico that you're going to land at a certain airport at a certain time. And then it starts getting interesting once you land in Mexico, because it really depends on the day and who really comes in customs to inspect the airplane. You know, it might be a breeze, you might be done in 5 minutes, or there might start to ask for a lot of paperwork. It's really important to have a special insurance policy that covers Mexico, and you have to get that from a Mexican insurance company. So that's something to keep in mind if you're flying into Mexico. But there's also another, association of pilots called Baja Bush pilots, who fly along the Baja California Peninsula. They also have pretty good resources. They've been really helping experimental airplanes to fly into Mexico. We've been having a little bit of issues with that, but it's really an interesting experience. And once you've done it once, as you say, everything in aviation comes with experience. I see a lot of pilots that fly once a month into Mexico, that they live in San Diego or somewhere in Arizona, and they'll fly once a month into Mexico just because it's so much cheaper. The airspace is very uncongested. You can really fly easily from one place to another, and the views are spectacular. So I would really encourage, pilots in the US to fly into Mexico. Probably check one of those resources before flying here. But once you're in Mexico, it's really easy to fly along. There's actually a lot of unnumbered airplanes flying in Mexico, and you'll be able to enjoy some spectacular views, obviously enjoy the culture and enjoy the landscape.
Oh, for sure. And good food every time I know that I go down there. So that's something I'll definitely have to look into eventually. So you kind of mentioned that, the airspace isn't as congested. How would you kind of compare the, GA community and just kind of population to the US? I mean, obviously we've probably got, a little bit more participants in the US, but in terms of pilots or activities such as air shows, just the overall community.
So this is an interesting fact. Mexico has the second largest executive aviation in the world, just after the US. Wow. So we have a lot of big jets flying around, but the GA community is somewhat dispersed. There's a lot more GA community up in the north, just because we're really close to the US. It's much easier, to get parts, mechanics, even airplanes. It's, I would say, much more affordable. And I would say that it prevails in most of Latin American countries.
Yeah, I can imagine. And so kind of going back, your goal of the channel was to inspire people to fly. But when you started this channel about 4 years ago.
Hola, soy Gabriel y esto es el Avionazzo.
Were you seeing a lot of other, Spanish-speaking YouTubers that were trying to, achieve the same goal, or is that why you kind of tapped into it and started creating your own videos?
It was actually one of the reasons why I started it.
Al estar buscando videos en YouTube, que no hay ningún canal que hable de la aviación general en México o que tenga videos en español.
I would see, Flight Chops or Stevo or Aviation 101 in the US, and I didn't see anything in Spanish. I didn't see anything for Latin America. And I was, I said, it's just so easy. We don't have to invent something new. We don't have to reinvent the wheel here. We just have to, take what these guys are doing in the US very well and try to, do it in a similar fashion in Mexico and Latin America. And it's a project that it's very niche. It's a smaller community than in the US, but I think it's a very tight community, and we're growing. Every time I hear more and more of people, young people that get into aviation because of the videos. So that's really rewarding, because that's the goal with the channel. And I think that's the goal with all of GA is we want to incentivize people to get into aviation.
For sure. And well, I know you are continuing to create a lot of content, and I'm sure the GA population is going to grow in Latin America a small smidge because of you. So Gabriel, thank you so much for that. And thank you so much for coming on this episode Between Two Wings. It was so great to chat with you.
Oh, it was my pleasure, and it'll be my pleasure to receive you here in Mexico one day, and hopefully we can fly along here.
Oh, for sure. I can't wait to get a full tour. We got to go to all the places, eat all the good food, see all the planes. It'll be great. Well, everyone, thank you so much for tuning into this episode Between Two Wings. We'll see you next time.